Hello everyone and welcome to Building Excel Macros to Assist with Routine Audit Tasks. I'm Jim Kaplan, founder of AuditNet, and with us today is my colleague and dear friend Rich Lanza, an ACL and audit software expert. This webinar represents a collaboration between AuditNet and AuditSoftware.net in delivering training series focusing on audit software. We're glad you could join us. I'll be moderating today's webinar. A little bit about myself for those of you who don't know me. I'm Jim Kaplan, the founder of AuditNet with a background as a chief audit executive, Internet for Auditors pioneer, and an auditor who believes and promotes the use of technology for audit. And the next slide will provide you with a little information about AuditNet. Before we proceed to today's material and introducing Rich Lanza, I'd like to go through a few important housekeeping points that we need to cover. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all participants within 48 hours after the conclusion. You will receive an email notification with instructions for viewing the recording. We kindly request that everyone fill out the brief online evaluation questions that you'll see at the conclusion of the webinar. Your feedback is very valuable, so please take a minute or two to complete the survey. In addition, because the webinar qualifies for 2 CPE credits, we will be putting up polling questions in compliance with NASBA rules. Those answering the questions will receive their CPE certificate by email within 7 to 10 business days. Please note, this applies only to the live session as we're unable to offer CPE for the recorded webinar. We will take your questions during the webinar. Submit your questions via the chat window at the lower right-hand box on your screen. Simply type your question, press return to send it. Any question we're unable to answer by the end of the webinar will be answered directly within 48 hours. In addition, a few technical items. If you're having trouble with the webinar software, check to see if Java is enabled and whether you have any pop-up blockers disabled. If you're still not able to get the webinar to function, just log out and log back in again. If you can connect to the webinar in the audio portion but get kicked off at any time, just reconnect using the same steps you used at first. You should have all received a copy of the handouts. They were sent out about an hour ago. Thank you again for joining us. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Rich Lanza to cover Building Excel Macros to assist with routine audit tasks. Rich?
Great. Thanks a lot, Jim, and thanks everybody for coming today. I wanted to say that I've used Excel for many years, probably about 20 years, and ACL as well, and other products. But maybe like yourself, I have not used macros too much, and to be quite honest with you and why she's going to be helping us out today, Tracy with MrExcel.com, and we'll talk more about MrExcel.com, it really has helped me on a lot of these. So, I would get into a bit of a bind and have some sort of work paper or data import process or something that I needed to do, and I actually had Tracy help me out in those areas. So Tracy will be joining us today a bit through, I guess, through an online meme. We'll be playing some videos, but in essence, a lot of what we have here today will be already pre-recorded, as you'll notice with the production of the videos. Again, Tracy's background is that she's used Excel for close to 20 years as well. But she's used it almost extensively, written various books for Q Publishing, and is just fantastic. It's amazing, what you can do with macros, and in a lot of ways I've learned a great deal about what's possible with macros, and today you'll not only learn what's possible, but also how to do it. And just as to the learning objectives themselves, why I like macros and why I tend to use Excel for the most part as my delivery method of the data when I've processed it. So a lot of data I will process in ACL or a higher end type product that can handle millions of records of data, but then I need to give it to a client or give it to the audit department, and the audit department usually does not have those extensive tools, and quite frankly they may have had those tools but they haven't trained up in them, and it's just, it's not as usable sometimes to work with it. So Excel is such a great place to, to work within with your work papers. And, wouldn't it be great if you could have a lot of these macros built into the work papers so that it can really drive a lot more automation and getting rid of a lot of the routine tasks. So we're going to talk about some of the top routine tasks that I've called up Tracy about over the years, but this time she's showing us the magic tricks on how to actually do the magic tricks, which is great, and I think she did a great job in simply presenting that. I'm doing a couple of magic tricks myself today with these macros, but clearly Tracy is much better at that, so I need to note that up front. Again, with that said, we are going to also provide a macro sheet to you as part of the files that you'll get, and these files will be loaded out to a website, auditsoftwarevideos.com, that we'll talk about at the end of the presentation, and you can access it really for the next 12 months and ongoing if you'd like. But with that said, those are some things. Now, in detail, I wanted to go through what we would learn today, just so you had a better idea of what we were going to work on. For the first item, what I wanted to talk about is kind of preparing Excel for macro development. And I kind of noticed this as I was looking at Tracy's screen. I was saying, what is that button over there and what's this button over here? I don't have these things, and she always has these things turned on because she's developing all the time, but probably you don't have these things turned on either, similar to myself. And that's something that I ended up, what we'll do is we'll walk you through basically how to set up your Excel so that you can build your macros. And there are some concerns with macros, so we'll need to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about doing a bit of a horizontal window type macro where it's just kind of a, push a button and get your horizontal windows. If you had, let's say, 3 spreadsheets open, it would then show that in a horizontal window for you. You could hit another button, reformat all the date columns within your spreadsheet, as an example. If you want to add a total to the end of a column magically, quickly, you just push a button, boom, it'll happen. We'll teach you how to do that. These are all things that everybody knows how to do these steps. It's not like it's that hard to add a total to the end of a column. But, who wants to sit there and do it and go find where is the bottom of that column, do an equal sum, go to the top. It's something where if you could just push a button, why not do that instead? So then we're going to talk about how to put those macros together, and kind of putting the above items together a bit will be a way of showing you how to work with subroutines and how to run multiple macros at once. So that'll be something that over time, I find I use ACL a lot, as I say, and I use Excel a lot. But with ACL, I do a lot of scripting, and with that product, I always say to people, it really isn't that hard what I'm doing. It's just a matter of knowing kind of which step to go first, which step to go second, which one to go third, and that's how in putting these macros together into a sub, you can do that. You can kind of put these things together. Then we're going to get into other items here that I think are more functional. So the first part here, getting up to the sub part, is really just getting you through the basics of macro development, explaining a few key points about macros, and then putting it together. Then I wanted to show you some more functional things to do. So adding tick marks, one thing that I find whenever you're in your Excel sheet, you might be adding little buttons and marks and notations to the right whenever you see a data point that you don't like, or you want to add some sort of notation. And wouldn't it be great if, and we'll show you how at the top of your screen you can just have like a tick mark legend, and you just click on the button, and then it would show up wherever you had your cell. So it's something where you can very, very quickly add tick marks to your work papers. Importing data, which I do a lot. I'm importing data into Excel a lot, and a lot of times then reformatting that data to make it look prettier. And at least today we're going to talk about importing the data. Similarly, we get a lot of Excel spreadsheets, and I need to organize that data. So there is a lot of organizing of moving data around, which can get really routine. I mean, we have, I think, some good examples we're going to show you today. I'm trying to explain it quickly here, but just imagine you get a data file that's more formatted as columns, and you need the data more as rows. And it's something where we're going to walk through basically how to do that, but it's something where you're going to see a task that might have taken you hours to do manually with a macro will just take you a few minutes. Last but not least, I have a Excel audit tool that's going to risk assess your entire population of Excel spreadsheets, and it's a really neat tool, again, developed by MrExcel himself, who we'll talk about, and Tracy works with. But again, just wanted to kind of go through these learning objectives with you. So with this, without further ado, I do want to get started with the presentation. We will be starting here in just a moment, so just bear with me 1 second and we'll get going. Thoughts with you, and just wanted to go over some macro thoughts with you. And just first off, I mean, macros and VBA, or Visual Basic, has been part of Excel since 1995. Now, in 1999, there was something called the Melissa virus that got passed around from computer to computer, and was a bit of a problem in that it just kind of auto-ran itself and got a lot of people worried. And we'll talk in a little bit about the trust center in Excel and how that came to light. But again, macros are something that you want to be a little bit careful of. But if you've created it yourself, or you've gotten it from a trusted party, a friend, a coworker, and you know that they haven't loaded a virus into that, it really should not be a problem and not a reason to stop using Excel or macros for that matter. Just some other thoughts is, macros, you really have to be concerned about how it works on different data. A lot of people will create a macro and will immediately then try to reuse that macro on another spreadsheet or in some other fashion and get very disgruntled because it just doesn't work. And there's something about the fact that although it's working great on this one spreadsheet, it's just not working on the other one. And we're going to talk a bit about something called relative references, and we'll probably say it multiple times on these recordings, but you got to make sure that that's set to on, and therefore also choose your keystrokes wisely. I mean, if you're moving down or clicking with your mouse on a particular cell within Excel, that works, but actually using things like your end arrow key and shift end and then your arrow key will bring you right to the end of that data, regardless if it's 10 row or 10 rows in one column, or if it's 100 rows. So is it going to go down to that 10th cell, or it's going to go down to the 100th cell? It's all really dependent upon the keystrokes that you're using. And ask for help as well. There are some help that we're going to talk about just in a second here. But with that said, I find that Excel has made it a lot easier, and as we look at some things within Excel and out on the web, I want to show you right now, we're going to talk just a little bit here about the Trust Center and how Excel's made it easier, and also how to ask for help. From a help point of view, I want to note that MrExcel and Tracy from MrExcel will be talking with us today, and we greatly appreciate her coming to help out. And in taking a look, Bill Jelen, MrExcel, and Tracy working with him has a variety of things that you can purchase and also learn from, and there's a lot of free stuff too, so I don't want to just note it, the purchase stuff. While there is a store and there's consulting services, and you too can work with Tracy, what we find is that the actual message board you'll find will show up when you go into even Google and start Googling a question. A lot of times you'll be brought right to Bill's website, MrExcel.com, because there is somewhere on here he's noted how many thousands of answers they have out here. It's some crazy number. So we have 3 million posts, 217,000 members. So it's something where if you have a question, it's probably answered out on the message board somewhere. And in addition to that, there are a variety of books and other newsletters and seminars and that sort of thing. I'm just scrolling down here to show you the wealth of knowledge that Bill provides. I personally like some of his YouTube videos as well as his podcasts, which you can get, and I'm just looking over here on the right, where there's a lot here that you can just grab and learn from as well. So, from a help point of view, I have to note MrExcel.com, and do thank Tracy again for coming today to help us out from MrExcel. Excel has gotten a lot better and a lot easier, as much as people have their 2 cents about how the ribbon works in Excel. In a lot of ways, the ribbon really is useful. And I mean, just looking around at how much more you're able to see in one place versus how we used to do things, and just minimizing the ribbon here. If I just go over here and say minimize the ribbon, this was kind of the old days, right? And everything you had to go down to some menu, and instead of it being shown in this way, you had to kind of go to some very difficult menu to find things. The ribbon does put a lot of stuff here, and why a lot of people, for example, if I want to sort things from A to Z, I could make a macro button for that, or I could just hit the A to Z button, which is right here now. And I mean, you have to learn where some of this stuff is. We get that. But at the same time, it really makes it a lot easier that we have this ribbon now. So I think over time, people will learn to love the ribbon, and probably why macros haven't been as much used recently, even in that people have just kind of gone to the ribbon and taken a lot of the features of Excel. But what I find with macro development, and what we'll talk about in the uses or different types of macros that you can run, that you'll find that macros are more specific for you and things that within your day-to-day that you'd like to do. So instead of just being able to sort something A to Z, a macro would be used to import a data file with a certain number of columns and put them in this place and make sure it's formatted a certain way, and et cetera, et cetera. So again, that's really how Excel has gotten a lot easier through the ribbon, and why macros sometimes aren't used. But one thing we want to really note with macros, and just going to this Office button first, is you have to go to your Excel options and take a look at your Trust Center. And this is a new feature. Again, Melissa virus was a real concern. But if you go to your Trust Center settings, you have a variety of settings here, and one thing would be the macro settings. Now, what I tend to do is I tend to disable all macros with notifications, so it's going to disable it, let me know. I then have the right to enable it, and we'll show some examples of this later. But it depends what your security policy is. I would say disabling all macros without notification may not be the best, because you just don't even know there's a macro in there. And enabling all macros is definitely, in my opinion, not a good idea, because now you're really kind of opening yourself up for the Melissa virus to just take over your computer if you open up an Excel document and it has a macro in there. So definitely wanted to show you the macro settings. This is the one I pick. Definitely check with your security people and make sure that you're picking the right option for you, but that seems to be a very functional way of using Excel. So just some key macro uses to go over, and we'll be doing a lot of these today. I find that just formatting data itself is very useful, and something I do over and over again. Adding totals and formulas to columns, and even though we'll talk about adding totals today, you can easily just kind of, mouse click down one and then add a formula such as a percentage of total or something else. And so it is easy to start adding not only a sum but other formulas pretty quickly. Importing data files, especially if you have a certain set of data that you get all the time, never changes, it's so much better to put that into a macro, push a button, and have it imported every time the same way. An audit thing, adding tick marks, I do find is something that is very useful. And moving data around spreadsheets as well can be a very useful thing. And again, something where if over and over again you need to have this step done, it's so much easier just to have a quick macro that you can run and just kind of, mouse click down a particular spreadsheet, and it'll just very, very quickly move all your data around for you. Bottom line is anything you repetitively do over and over again that it's a lot easier just to push a button for, or a shortcut key in macro language, is something that you really should be putting into a macro as opposed to doing it manually. When opening Excel, you're going to want to consider setting up the Excel window in a way where it's going to be a lot easier for you to run your macros. I mean, you can go to things like View, Macros, and provide get this information, but there's a better way. For one thing, if you just select your Start button, Office button, and go to your Excel options, you can first off select the Show Developer tab in Ribbon. That is going to provide an entire new ribbon tab that right now, watch here, is not there. And like magic, it is now here. And the Developer tab provides you the ability to click in between Visual Basic, which showed up on my other screen, so I'll just kind of show that to you. And also, let me just close that. Also to see any macros that you might have. You can see within this workbook we don't have any right now, but we'll be making a lot in the next few minutes here. And a lot of the features that we've been talking about, such as, or will be talking about, such as relative references and recording macro, are all available to you on this tab. So that's kind of a good first step. The second thing that you're going to want to do is just right-click on the bottom of your, I guess, a toolbar here, and the customized status bar. This is the bottom. There's a lot of features, and you may want to consider doing things like a minimum and maximum whenever you highlight cells within Excel. So let me just quickly show you that while I'm here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If I highlight that, notice I have average, count, and sum showing up. I can put minimum, and I can put maximum, and we have the minimum 1, maximum 5 now showing up there as well. So this is useful. It's something to consider throwing in there, and take a look at all the other ones as well. Okay, macro recording, though, is the one that we're going to want. Now, I mean, there's so many places you could go. You could go to record macro on developer. You could go view macros, record macro. But just to add that macro recording to the bottom, just puts that right in your views so that whenever you want to record a macro, you can just select that item right there. Okay, so the last thing to consider, and I like this one the best because you can actually, you can do a lot with this one. Up here at the top, again, you may not have ever touched this. Up here at the top, we have things like, well, the quick access toolbar. And you have a lot of things that you can actually play with in here. And what we can do is show below the ribbon, and Tracy, who will be helping me out, will show you that in a second. And I've added to this speak cells, which might be a little bit hard for you to hear right now, but if we speak the cells, actually if I put like a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, it'll actually speak through those particular cells. It'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a very computerized voice, but it still works. So now that I've moved it, I can again go show above ribbon, and I can say show below ribbon. But now that I have it, I can actually select more commands. And by selecting more commands, see, notice I have speak cells, you can bring over a lot of different things and from various parts of Excel. And again, commands not in the ribbon right now that, again, just so many things here that you may want to bring to that customized access toolbar. And The macros section, though, I'm just going to highlight this. I actually have the data analysis tool pack in Excel, so it automatically brings up all these macros. So here's my regression one, right? If I wanted to run regression, I can add that. And if I didn't like that picture, even though that's kind of the picture for a macro, I can change that by modifying that and picking anything. I mean, I could pick a smiley face and say, you know, I love doing regression, so here's my smiley face, and I hit OK. So with all of this set up, we now have our quick access toolbar here with the macros that we can run. We have our developer tab of the ribbon, and then we also have down below the macro recorder all set to record macros as we need. So I just wanted to go through that before we jumped into doing too many of these macros. Okay, and we're back, and what I wanted to do is load up our first poll, so bear with me 1 second as we launch the first poll. Okay, so the first question is, what was the name of the macro virus in 1999? And we have these polling questions really just to gauge attendance and also for NASBA purposes. It's meant to kind of keep making sure that you're taking part in it. And so far, most of you have voted, so thank you. And we're almost there. Note all of the Allman Brother Band references in the quote. And actually, I believe everyone has voted, so I think we're set there. So let me just bear with me 1 second. I just need to close the poll and share that with everyone, so you should be seeing that now. So yes, the Melissa virus was the virus that a while back, and you haven't really, knock on wood, heard of too many more since then, so that's been good. And what we are going to now kind of jump into is the macro demonstration work. And you know, one thing I want to note is we are obviously using some produced videos for today's session, and really just to make sure it's done right and completely for you. But what I find with this, especially the macro type videos and learning that you're going to have, you almost want to go back to these from a video perspective again and again, because what I find is that there's just a lot here to basically take in a quick fashion. So try to keep up with it, watch along. You will be getting all of the sample files that you're watching here today. And again, we'll get started with that right now. So just bear with us 1 second. And I just need to hide that poll, and we're just going to get back to showing the screen here. So just bear with me 1 second. Okay.
Excel comes with a hidden powerful tool you may or may not know about. If you do know about it, you may have tried using it and then gotten frustrated when it didn't do exactly what you wanted. This tool is the macro recorder. The macro recorder allows you to record certain steps and then play them back again at a later time. The macro recorder can be used to make selections from the ribbon tab and then assign those selections to a button so that you don't have to go through the tab looking for what you want every time you need it. You can just go ahead and attach it to your cat. 3 buttons that I have here are macros that I've recorded that I find very useful. This first one changes the column headers from letters to numbers and back. The second is one that I've recorded to show or hide the sheet tabs along the bottom of the sheet. This third button will take multiple windows and stack them in a horizontal manner. To do this manually, I would have to go to View, Arrange All, Horizontal. Or I can click this one button. To record for yourself this horizontal windows shortcut, what you need to do first is have more than one window open. Then you can start recording your macro. To record a macro, click on the Record Macro button in the lower left corner of your status bar. You need to enter a name for the macro. You can go with the default macro 1, macro 2 that Excel gives you, but then in the future you may not remember what it's for. So first let's give a descriptive name. The name cannot have any spaces or odd characters in it. So we're going to call this one Horizontal Windows. You can apply a shortcut key to the macro, or like me, you can assign a button to it. Let's go ahead and assign a shortcut key. We're going to call it Control W. So we're just going to type in a W here. We're going to choose to store this macro in your personal macro workbook. By storing it in the personal macro workbook, it will be available to all your workbooks that you have open in your Excel. If you need it stored in the specific workbook, then you can click on this drop down and select the workbook that you want it to save in. Again, we're going to choose the personal macro workbook so that's always available. We can type in a brief description. And then we're going to click OK. The minute we click OK, Excel is going to start recording our actions. So think about what you want to do. We're going to go to the View, Arrange All, and Horizontal. Go to Arrange All, Horizontal, it's already selected in this case, and click OK. The button down here you notice has changed. We're going to stop recording. Congratulations, you recorded a macro. Since we went ahead and assigned it to a shortcut key, we can do it by going Control W. And right away we have our horizontal windows. To access the Developer tab as shown here, you will need to right-click in the ribbon area, select Customize the ribbon, and then click the Developer checkbox and click OK. To view the macros that you recorded, go to the Developer tab and click Visual Basic. You can also use the keyboard shortcut of Alt F11. When you get into the Visual Basic editor, on the left you should see the Project Explorer. If you do not see the Project Explorer, then go to View, Project Explorer. In this case, you're seeing two projects in my Project Explorer. The Personal Workbook, which has macros that I've recorded in Excel and are available to all workbooks, and then the Training Data Workbook that I've opened with sample data. To navigate through the Project Explorer is much like navigating through the File Explorer in Windows, except to get your code to show up in here on the right side, which is your code pane, you need to double-click on these modules. Each one of these items is considered a module. As you can see, nothing happens in the code pane on the right when I simply single-click on a module. But if I double-click on a module, you get a blank code pane because I have no code in this module. This module does have code. I've clicked on it once, you don't see anything. I double-click on it, and you see the macros that I have recorded. Every month you receive the workbook in front of you. And every time you receive it, you have to go through and reformat the date columns. As you can see, they're reformatted of day, month, year. And you would rather have them in month, day, year. It doesn't take you very long to do it manually, but wouldn't it be nice to have a keyboard shortcut that you could press that would do each column individually right away? When you're recording a macro, you need to think through the steps that you're going to make, because Excel will record exactly what you do. So if my recording includes my selecting the cell, then every time I run the macro, Excel will select cell D2, which means if I want to also format this column and this column with the same macro, it's not going to work. So before you start recording, think about what you want to do. In this case, we want to be able to select the entire column and then format it. We want Excel to format the selected column, but we don't want Excel necessarily selecting the column for us. So what we need our macro to do is select the entire column and reformat the date. So let's select the cell at the top of our column. We know we don't want Excel recording that. Let's start recording. We're going to enter the name, reformat, date. We're going to assign it to a shortcut key of Control-Shift-D. To get the shift in here, simply press Shift on your keyboard and then the D, and Excel will add the Shift-D. We're going to store it in our personal macro workbook. And a brief description. Let's start recording. So we're going to go down, select this data, and then we're going to go to short date. And we're done. We click stop. So let's go here, and we'll go Control-Shift-D, and it didn't work. It went back to the first column that I recorded. And this is the frustration that many first-time recorders run into. So what's going on? Let's take a look at our code. As you can see, when I recorded the macro, I selected an exact range, and Excel recorded that. As you can see, it's an A1 reference. So Excel is always going to select this specific range and then apply the number format. That's not what we want. So, failure, macro recorder is useless. No, it's not. You just have to know how to use it. Let's go ahead and delete this macro. Just go ahead and select from sub to end sub, hit delete on your keyboard, and then you can close the Visual Basic Editor. The mistake that I made with the previous macro is I selected a specific range. Using my mouse, I went ahead and selected a range. Excel recorded those exact steps. We don't want it to. We want it to record the steps, but not the exact address. So how do you do that? If you look on the Developer tab, there's a button called Use Relative References. Much like formulas, A1 is an absolute reference. It's always exactly A1. But if you're using relative references, then it's based on the location of the cell that you are currently on. So in this case, we need to use relative referencing when recording this macro. So click Use Relative Referencing to turn it on. Now let's record our macro again. First, you definitely want to start with where you want the column to be selected. Because if I'm here and then I record moving to over here, Excel will always do that when it runs. Let's record our macro. Now, what I'm going to do is use a keyboard shortcut to navigate down to the bottom of the column. For those who don't know, it's Control, Shift, and down arrow. If you press all those buttons on your keyboard at the same time, Excel will automatically highlight to the bottom of the column. I then apply my desired format, and I hit stop. So, did it work this time? Let's select the next column and go Control-Shift-D. And it worked. And then Control-Shift-D. And it worked. Well, that's great. And it works with a small bit of data. What if I have a larger array of data? Remember when we looked at the macro earlier, it was exactly D2 to D18. It stopped at row 18. Is that going to happen again? Let's find out. Control-Shift-D, and it selected the entire column. Why? Because instead of using my mouse to select a specific range and stopping on D18, I use the keyboard shortcut of Control-Shift-Down arrow. You should use the keyboard shortcuts for navigating around your Excel sheet as much as possible because it's not a specific instruction. By using the navigation keys to navigate around a sheet, you don't give Excel a specific address to go to. You're giving it an instruction to jump to the end of a row or to the end of a column. Let's record adding the sum of a column at the bottom of the column. So we already know how to do this, right? To navigate quickly to the bottom of a column, we start at the top, and then we just do a Control down arrow. You don't want to shift at this time because we're not selecting, we're just jumping down. And then we need to go down one more cell. And then we click the Auto Sum button. It puts in the formula for us. Hit Enter, and we're done recording, and we can stop. Simple, right? Okay, let's see. Did it really work? Let's test our macro on a larger data sample. So we place our cursor at the top of the column, and let's run our macro. And it didn't work. Look at that. It overwrote my data. It stopped exactly where it did in the macro that I recorded. Oh, I know why. I didn't have relative referencing on, right? Okay, so let's try this again, and this time I've got to make sure my relative referencing is on. See, relative referencing will stay on during a session of Excel with that workbook open, but the minute you close the workbook, it turns itself off. So always make sure that the relative reference option is turned on or off as you need it before you start recording. So let's try this again. Let's go here and we'll delete that. We're going to turn on relative referencing. We'll select our first cell and start recording. Now remember, I already have a macro called Invoice Total. So, and I can't have the same macro name twice. I need to rename it something else. We'll go Invoice Total 2. At the same time, I can't use the same shortcut key more than once. This time, let's not use a shortcut key. I'll show you another way to run a macro. All right, so this time our relative referencing is on. Let's see if we can get it right. Control down arrow, go down one, and we put in the sum. Hit Enter. Okay. Now we stop. Let's see if it'll work this time. We'll go to another data set. Select the first cell in the column. You can select this one too, by the way. I always just happen to select under the header. And to run this macro, we're going to go to View, Macros, View Macros. And we called this one Invoice Total 2 and click Run. It went to the bottom. But that's a really small number, isn't it? Well, look at that formula. It's not looking at the entire column. So what did we do wrong this time? We didn't really do anything wrong when we were using the sum button. It's just that the Excel macro recorder doesn't like us using the button. We can actually still add the sum of a column to the bottom of that column, but we have to do it a little bit more manually. So let's try this again. Again, we are going to go ahead and select the first cell in the column. We're going to start the macro recorder. Okay, We're going to go through the steps that we have so far. Control, down arrow, and now one more to go to the bottom of the column. Now this time we're going to type in the sum formula. We're going to do it with a little twist. So equal sign to start typing a formula, sum, left parentheses, B, $2, which means that we're doing a partial absolute reference. We're tying in that row, colon. And then the last cell in that column we want to include is B18. So go ahead and type B18, and then your closing parentheses, and hit enter. Stop the recorder. Now let's go to our data set. First cell. And we're going to play that macro. What do you think is going to happen? That's a much larger sum than last time. And look at it. It includes the entire column. Why did it work? Because this time we tied in the first cell. We made that absolute for the column. But then we told Excel to go ahead and make this relative. If you take a look at the code, Alt F11 to bring up the Visual Basic Editor, you can see down here, these are the past examples that we did. This was the first one where the relative reference was not turned on. And you can see hard-coded the B19 and the B20. In this one, relative referencing was turned on. So based on my selection of the first cell at the top of the column, they put in the formula. But you'll notice that it's absolute. In this case, again, relative referencing was still turned on, but when we typed in the formula, we were able to make it partial absolute and partial relative referencing. And this gave the macro recorder the needed flexibility so that it can add the column for any set of data.
Now we're going to be launching the second poll after Tracy finished there. Bear with me one second. Just launching that poll now. So just from a control key point of view, what keys can you select to quickly open the Visual Basic Editor? Is it Control X, Control Z, Control F9, or Alt F11? Many of you have voted so far. Do appreciate that and your attentiveness today. So been tracking that a bit on this, so we do appreciate that. And almost done here with the poll, and many of you have already filled it out. And 100% voted. So let me close that poll and share that with everybody. And you know, almost everyone got it. It's Alt F11 will bring you to the macro window. Now, at the same time, it's really not that hard in that, you know, what I find is that with the developer tab added, there's a great, you know, it makes it a lot easier to kind of get into, you know, with the developer tab added, it's very easy to find that macro section. You can actually also go in Excel to your view, and it's this. I'm in PowerPoint now, but if you go to your view menu, it'll actually bring you, and you'll see macros all the way over to the right. So the macros are all over the place in Excel. It's just a matter of finding them. And I also wanted to note, as we're doing these polling questions, taking breaks, you know, throughout the presentation, feel free to post questions, and I can respond back to those questions as you're asking them. Feel free. And I can even tap Tracy to help out as well. I am going to jump in and have Tracy start off with the next section here, which is talking about subroutines and working with subroutines. But again, the question bar should be within your GoToWebinar application. You should see that, so feel free to ask questions there as it comes up. Okay, without further ado, we'll get started here. Give us just a second.
If you've recorded several macros that you call one after another, you can create a single macro, also known as a sub, that will call these other macros. For example, I have a reformat date and an invoice total macro that I recorded. Note that these macros do include the selection of the specific cell so that the correct column is formatted. I'm going to create a single macro called format date data. I'm going to create one sub that will call reformat date and invoice total. To create this sub, first type the word sub, then the title of your sub. Just like when recording a macro, it has to be a single word without any strange characters. And then it has to end with an opening and closing parentheses. When I hit enter, Excel helps by putting the end sub at the bottom. My code is going to go between the sub and the end sub. To call another macro, first type the word call, space, and then the name of the macro that you want to call. The word call isn't required. If I wanted to, I could just do this. But so that you know what you're doing next time you look back at the code, put the word call in front of the name of the macro. We're done. To test your sub, return to Excel and run your sub. As you can see, it properly put the total at the bottom of my column and reformatted this column. My sub only formatted dates in column D. I also have dates in column F and column G that need reformatting. To do this, go back into the VBE and look at the code that reformats my dates. What it does is it selects D2, goes to the bottom of the column, and reformats the data. I'm going to copy these 3 lines of code and paste them twice because I have 2 more columns that I want to format. Returning to Excel, I see that F2 and G2 are these cells at the top of the column. So I'm going to change this D2 to F2 and this one to G2. So now what the code does is it goes to D2, goes to the bottom of the column and sets the format. Then it goes to column F, to the bottom of the column, sets the format, and then it does the same thing to column G. Let's save our changes, and then we'll go back and test the macro. Let's run the sub that reformats our data. As you can see, column F and column G, the dates are now formatted in my new format. When I look at my list of macros, I see subs that I no longer want to run individually. For example, invoice total and reformat date are both called by format data. So let's go ahead and hide these 2 subs. To do this, we bring up the Visual Basic Editor and go to the 2 subs that we want to hide. At the beginning of the word sub, we're going to type in the word private. And at the beginning of the invoice total, we will type in the word private. What this does is it hides these 2 subs from the list of macros, but format data can still call them. So now when we return to Excel and bring up our list of macros, you no longer see those other 2, but we can still call format data, which will run those 2 subs that we just hid from this list. What if you've recorded a macro that you want to share with someone else, or you recorded it to the active workbook but you meant to put it in your personal workbook? You don't have to re-record your macro. For example, this macro for placing green check marks next to records was stored in my personal workbook, but I want to send it with this file to somebody else. Open up your Visual Basic editor and go to the macro that you want to move. In this case, this is the only macro in Module 3. What I can do is simply drag it to the other workbook where I want it stored. As you can see, dragging it instantly made a copy of it and placed it in this workbook. Just remember that the workbook that has macros has to be saved as a macro-enabled workbook. Another way, for example, is if I have just a specific sub that I want to copy to another workbook. I can highlight from the sub to the end sub, copy. I can place it in an existing module in the other workbook, or if I want to place it in its own module, I can right-click, insert module, and paste it there. Subs found in the sheet and this work module cannot be dragged to another workbook. Why? Because you have to have a unique this workbook module, and you can't drag a sheet module between workbooks. You have to use the copy-paste method of transferring subs in sheets and workbook modules. When you have a lot of records to review, placing a tick mark next to each record as you review it is a great way of keeping track of where you are. Let's record the insertion of a symbol. We'll assign it to a keyboard shortcut to make it quicker to enter. We'll assign it to Control-Shift-A. Let's insert our symbol. So insert, symbol, go to the Webdings font, and here is a check mark that you can use. Click Insert, close. Notice that your cursor is still in the cell, so let's go ahead and hit Enter to get out of there and stop the recorder. So now let's give our macro a try. Control-Shift-A, and it puts an A in the cell. Let's take a look at the code to figure out what's going on. As you can see, what the macro recorded was me entering an A in the cell. But to make that work, that A is actually the Webdings font. But it did not change the cell into Webdings. It kept the Calibri and simply entered the A in there. So recording, inserting a symbol is not going to work because it doesn't also change the font of the cell. What can you do? To successfully create a macro where you're inserting a symbol, you're going to have to actually do each step yourself instead of using the insert symbol shortcut. Since we've already done this once, we know that the font we want to use is Webdings, and we know that the letter that needs to be in the cell is the A. So what we're going to do is record those steps. First, let's select a cell and start the recorder. We'll set up our shortcut key again to Shift-A. Now the first thing we're going to do is set the font on the cell to Webdings. Then we're going to type an A in the cell, and see, we get a check mark. If there's anything else we might want to do to the cell, for example, if we want a green check mark, then you can go ahead and change the font color or highlight the cell, make it bold, increase the font size, whatever you want to do to insert your symbol, and then click Stop on the recorder. So let's go to our next cell and see if it worked. Now, as I review my data, I can hit my keyboard shortcut and have my check marks to show that I've reviewed these records and they're okay.
Thanks again, Tracy, for that help. And I wanted to show a couple of things, one being the use relative references should be set. And again, use relative references, let me highlight that. It even tells you what it is. It's going to make sure that the actions are recorded relative to that selected cell. So you want to make sure that you're not setting it up in an absolute way. Otherwise, you're going to always have the tick mark being put in the same place every time, and that's not what you want. The other thing is the tick mark's get a little hard to remember. I mean, Control-Shift-T is the tick mark that I'm using, or the shortcut that I'm using for tick mark, and that's great, but you may not remember, and you may hit something else, and something undesirable happens. So a great way to handle this is just to go right to your Customize Access toolbar, and what I can do is change this to macros, go down to this tick mark, which is the one that I want, and then just select it and select the Modify button. So again, there's a way to, in this case I'm going to hit that check mark because that's what it is, and now I have a nice little check mark, and it, okay, so every time I hit this button it's going to put that there. So you could create, using this approach and using web dings or other types of formatting, it's very easy to create various tick marks. And let me just modify this. I mean, you may want to select symbols that are here. Probably makes it a little bit easier, so you could kind of look around and see what symbols that you like. But things like the red exclamation mark might be something where it's a problem. The pi symbol is something where it's used a lot in audit work papers, so that might be a good one. The up arrow, the down arrow, these are all really good things. And again, you feel free to get a little bit creative and maybe select your smiley face or sad face would be a problem for tick marks. But again, tick marks are used a lot by auditors, and to have a nice little row of them up at top that you can just easily kind of go up and click to as needed is just a great feature of Excel. And with this little macro, you can do quite a bit of tick mark legending very, very quickly. So we've launched the next poll for you, so that you can take a look at that. And the poll question: what word do you put in front of a sub-routine to hide it? So again, if you don't want to show all of the subs as macros in your macro list, you just want to show one macro. What is that word that you put in front? Is that word secret? Is it comment? Is it hide? Or is it private? Which one kind of hides that sub-function? So just take a look at that. Okay, most of you have voted. I'll just leave it open for another 30 seconds or so. And thanks again for the questions that have come through. It was kind of good timing on a couple of them, where in essence to share your macros with others, you don't want to save it to your personal workbook, and that tends to be where Excel will naturally put things, but you need to kind of save it to the workbook that you're working on, let's say, if that's what you want to do. We're going to show a really good example of that in kind of the next one, where we're importing data, and it'll create this macro-enabled workbook that is basically like a blank workbook, but yet when you push a button, it's going to import data. But this macro-enabled workbook you could throw around to anybody, and they would be able to use it no matter where they were. And I will be giving you one of those at the end of this. Again, at the end of the seminar, you're going to get access to audit software videos and be able to download these files. But with that said, that'll be a really good example for you as well, and may even be something that you want to kind of open up in the editor of the macro editor and see what you can learn from it. I've personally been too afraid to do it because, as you'll see, it's a pretty complex workbook that I'm going to send you. But at the same time, definitely there's got to be something to learn in there. Okay, with that said, let me close the poll and share it. And again, almost everybody got it right. The private is the word that you want to put in front of the subfunction in order to hide it. And again, that would be our focus there. So anyway, hide was real close, and probably hide is used in other types of programming language. So totally understood why that one was selected. And again, just kind of going through here, what we're now going to talk about is importing data and adding a macro button to your worksheet itself. So just imagine like a little form button. And what I like about this one is that there are lots of form buttons that you can add. I mean, granted, a macro button is something that's probably the most useful for what we're talking about today, but there are a lot of other form buttons that are addable to your Excel spreadsheet, and do urge you to take a look at that. So again, any questions that come in, feel free to post them as they come, and more than happy to answer as we're going along here in the conversation today, and do appreciate it. And I'm now going to hand it over again to Tracy so that she can continue on with the training lessons. So bear with me one second.
This video will show you how to automatically import data from a text file. After this, I'm going to show you a few options to make it more flexible. So this time we're going to set up the macro in an existing workbook. Let's record our macro. And this time, instead of saving it in the personal workbook, we're going to save it in this new workbook that I have open. Go through the normal steps that you would to import your data. Because I need to show my text files, I need to make sure that the file type is set to all files. Go through the text import wizard. We have a comma delimited file, so we're going to select delimited, click next. It's a comma delimited file, and as you can see, Excel shows us how it's going to break up the columns. This first column is a supplier number. It's not numbers that I want to do any math with, so let's set it to a text type. The others are currency, so we will leave them as general. Now we're finished. Excel has imported data. We're done recording. Let's stop the recorder. Let's take a look at our code. Because I set it to save it in the current workbook, let's go up to here and double click on Module 1. This is the macro that we just recorded. As you can see, it opens up a text file. Here is the path to the text file. It includes the full path and the full file name, including the extension. It also records all the other settings that I had made for the import. So next time I open and run this macro, it will import this exact file with the same settings as last time. To save our macro, return to the original blank workbook and do a File, Save As, making sure to save it as a macro-enabled workbook. So let's test our macro. And there's our data. Now, what if the file name changes month to month, day to day? Well, you can always go into the code and change this line right here, making sure not to remove the double quotes on either end. Make sure that you have a full path, full file name, and the extension. But it can be a little bit of a pain to have to go into your code to make a change. Wouldn't it be easier to just have the file name in a cell or the full path and file name in the cell? That's what I'm going to show you how to do here. So first, let's go ahead and give the cell a label. Try that again. So let's go and give the cell a label. In this first scenario, we're only going to change the file name, not the path. Our current file name is supplier revenue text. Let's go ahead and copy that entire title and place it in this cell. We have placed the name of the file in cell B1. Let's return to our code, and now let's modify the code to read B1. What we need to do is remove the file name from the quotes, but notice I've left this last slash here. I'm going to go just to the right of the double quotes, space, ampersand, and then the name of the sheet. Notice the name of the sheet goes in quotation marks, followed by the cell address, also in quotation marks, value. What I've done here is you've got the full path in quotation marks, and then we're telling Excel to join with that the cell containing the name of the file. Worksheets sheet 1, because the name of the sheet was sheet 1, and then the cell address b1.value. So next time this macro is run, it will build the name of the file from this information right here. Let's go ahead and give it a run. And there you go. It works. You can now go and change the name of your file name simply by changing the cell value right here. For example, if your file name is supply revenue may update, again, make sure you have the proper extension. You can put that in B1 and run your code. And now your supply revenue for May is also imported. If you need even more flexibility because the file might move around, for example, on a network location, you can put the full path and file name with this cell. So you can go ahead and enter the full path and file name. I would definitely recommend copying the path from your Windows Explorer and pasting it in, and then the file name. Then you go into the code and you would just remove the part at the beginning here that was giving it a set file path. So this, again, worksheets sheet 1 range B1 is referring to sheet 1 cell B1. In this case we have the full file path within this cell, and we can run our code. And there again, the information gets imported. Instead of having to go to the macros list to run this import macro, you can add a button to the sheet and run the macro from the button. To do this, go to Insert, and under Form Controls, select the Button Form Control. Draw your button, and the Assign Macro window will pop up the minute you let go of the mouse after drawing the button. Select Import Data, click OK, and if you want to change the text here, you can right-click on the button, Edit Text, and click outside the button. So let's save our changes. And now we'll run the macro by clicking on a button. And there you go. There's how to run a macro from a button.
Okay, so we've launched the next poll based on this learning point here, which is the importing data. I have to say I use this one a lot. I'll talk about this in a second, but let's get to this question. What VB code function do you use to tell Excel to look in a given cell for information? Is it the worksheet? Is it the cell? Is it the range? Or is it the copy? So which function there do you utilize? A few of you have voted, more have voted now, so thank you. And we'll just give that another minute or so before we get started. What I find, I am importing data quite a bit, and what I do find into Excel, and what I do find, some of it comes from text files, some of it I actually have like exports from ACL files, and it's not really that formatted that well. So what I end up doing is using Excel to not only import the data like we showed here today, but once it's imported, it's really not that hard to highlight the whole first row, let's say, and make it bold, and then highlight all of the columns and make sure, and open them all up to what data is within that column, so it's nicely auto-formatted, and you could even put like a yellow format for, let's say, all of the row there as well. So, I mean, it makes it where you not only can import the data, but really clean up the data very nicely. So I use that one quite a bit, and hopefully you can see value in doing it. And what's nice about these macros is that you really need to kind of create a separate one for each of the data files. And what we're going to talk about in a second as well, that comes into play even more. So anyway, getting back to the poll, let me close that. Many of you got this one right. We'll share that. It's actually the range function. So it's worksheet and then range. So worksheet kind of says which Excel spreadsheet do you want to utilize, and then range would basically tell you the cell to be looking at, or the range of cells to look at. So let me hide that and show my screen. And we'll get started with this next one, which is moving data around. And what I find is that this is great if you get like a report file and the file is formatted in an odd way, and you really need to be able to move that information around so that it could be much more usable. What I find is that when we analyze data files, we need rows and columns of data. And let me just quickly show you here, what we mean by that, of course. Rows, columns of data. Bear with me as my Excel opens up. So we'll open up the sample file that we're going to be giving you. Bear with me, sure. So this generally is how you like to get data, and again, data that looks like this is not so much the way you'd like to get it, because you kind of want it to look more like this, where it's just rows and columns and no spaces and nothing at the top and nothing at the bottom and anything like that. So again, give us a second here, and we'll get started with the next training session, which is going to basically show you how to move your data around in Excel. Many times we get data files and they're not in the best format. Now, I'm just going to show a simple example for today, but hopefully you can use your imagination and think of other ways that this could be used. A lot of times people use report writer tools like Monarch or ACL, or even IDEA has within them an ability to take files that look like this and turn them into data files that are going to look like at the end of what we are doing today, and much more in a row and columnar type format. Now again, this is a simple example. We probably could use pivot tables, report writer tools, all these other things, but let's just show how with a macro we can do the same thing. So taking this data, I'm going to start, and this is vendor invoices by department, and notice we have each vendor, and then underneath we have the 7 departments and how much money was spent in each department. And let's just say that we wanted to put this data in more of a organized format across the top here. Well, the first thing that I can do is just manually add to the top here, and we'll just go to our paste transpose, and that'll put the departments in that format. Then I can add a header line here that says vendor. Maybe, just to make it a little neat, I'll insert a column there just so that we have a little bit of extra space. Okay, now that my schedule is ready to go, what I can do is get ready to do my macro. Now, going to my Developer tab, I want to make sure Relative References is set to on, and you'll notice it'll be orange when it's set to on. And with that said, now we're ready to carefully get started. I'm going to select my macro button below here, and that will start a macro. Now, I'm going to call this transpose data, and why don't we call it department. I'm going to save it just in this current workbook, and as a shortcut key, I'm going to do Control-Shift-E for, just so we know. I know we haven't used that one to date, so Control-Shift-E will bring up that particular macro. Okay, so now I'm on. What I can do, because I know that I'm only a few rows over here, is I can copy this information by right-clicking and saying copy, and move my cursor over 3 spaces, and then do a paste, and in this case I'll just do a normal paste. Then I'm going to go back 2 spaces and down 1 space with my arrow key, and then I'm going to hit the Shift End and then down arrow key, and that'll bring me to the end of the line. Now, it's always 7 in this case, but in case it was 7 sometimes and 10 other times, that would be a way to make sure that you got everything. With the same approach here, I'm going to do a copy. I'm going to go up 1, over now 3 spaces, right-click, say Paste Special, transpose, hit Enter. Then, just to, well, I can stop at this point, but just to make it easy, and because this schedule is in a set format, what I can do is I can go over 1, 2, 3, 4, a Shift End, then I'm going to let go of the Shift End, and I'm just going to hit my down arrow key, and then I'm going to go Shift End again, hit my down arrow key again, and that is going to bring me to the next line. Now I'm going to stop at this point because what I've done is I've set it up so that I'm ready to go for the next one. So let me hit the Stop Macro button. And now that I have that, I can basically say Control-Shift-E, and it did work. It put it right there. And so I can hit Control-Shift-E, and that data is posted, and it brings me to the next line. I can hit Control-Shift-E again, and now it brings me to the end of the spreadsheet, which is telling me that I'm done for the day. I don't have to do any more, so I can hit my End button and go to the top again. And by doing so, I now have the 3 columns, or excuse me, 3 columns of data now as 3 rows of data. All I have to do now is highlight these columns here and just go to my Data Sort button and sort on, in this case, well, because I'm not starting at the top, it makes it a little bit curious. So let me just bear with me 1 minute here. I'm just going to head all the way down and highlight all that. And then I can go Data Sort. I can sort on the vendor field. And do I want to sort anything that looks like a number as a number? Sure thing. At this point, I'm fine with that. And then what it'll do is it'll sort that data and bring it to the top, all transposed. And again, moving a fair amount of data around, but within that particular spreadsheet. Now, just wanting to show another example of this, but a little bit more complex data. In this particular case, we actually have vendor information, address line 1, city, state, zip, and then down below we have a country sometimes, then we have a country phone, and a lot of times you can get data like this, and here I have 2 lines in between, sometimes I have 1 line, so it makes it very difficult to do basically a kind of a copy and paste and just transpose everything. It's just not going to work so well. So one of the things that you could do is to use a macro. Again, I would start with this is going to be very similar to what we did before. I would start with that first cell, hit the macro record button, and let's call this transpose vendor info, and we'll do Control-Shift-F for this one, and we'll save it just in this workbook. And now that I've done that, I can do my Shift and down arrow key. I can right-click copy. I can move over 2 spaces, just for lack of any better. Let's just make it 2. And I can right-click, say Paste Special, and transpose. Now, again, I can hit my End key to the left, which brings me all the way over, my End key down, my End key down again, and we're going to stop at this point. And now that I have that, if I go Control-Shift-F again, it copies the data, but notice now it adds that extra field, brings me down to the next, Control-Shift-F, and not only did it finish, it got the phone in there as well, but it now brings me to the end. Now, one of the things I wanted to note here is that this Control-Shift-F thing, it really can be something that you're very, very quickly going with. So, I mean, if you had 100 vendors, you just have your Control-Shift held down, and you hit the F key over and over and over again. And, again, even if it's 1,000 times, if you remember playing some of those video games back as a child, hitting that button lots of times in a row isn't that hard. And even if you have to do it 1,000 times, it still is something that won't take that long and will get you to the bottom of the spreadsheet pretty quickly. Now, again, just wanted to note that there probably are some other ways that are beyond today's discussion, but would macro that even further. So, I mean, again, things to kind of look at on that MrExcel.com message board to learn more about, or, feel free to send an email with questions on things like that as well. I have another polling question that we've posted there, and just talking about what we've talked about many times today, so hopefully this comes through okay and isn't too hard for you. What do you need to make sure is on before running the macro? Is it conditional referencing, referential referencing, relative referencing, or complete referencing? So most of you have voted. Everyone's gotten it right so far, so good job there. And yeah, just take a look at that one, and we will get started with the next section in a second. Again, if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to post those questions. And we'll just keep this open just for another few seconds here. Almost everyone has voted, so again, thank you for the attentiveness. It's a high percentage of attentiveness. I can check on it via GoToWebinar. It kind of tells you how much you're watching somehow. And again, thank you for everyone. Almost everyone is watching today, so we do appreciate it. Okay, let me close and share that. And just let you know, almost everyone got it right. It is relative referencing, and that is that button in the middle of your Excel sheet where, again, let me just show this to you. When I hide the poll, you're just going to see here it will show as use relative references, which is this button right here over, and I think I can, it's probably hard for me to show that to you. I can use a little arrow here and just say this is the use relative references right here, and hopefully you can see that. So again, thank you again for working with that. Actually, that's how it's put on. So, okay, with that said, we will continue with the next section. And this next section is going to be talking about how we can use an advanced Excel spreadsheet. It's an advanced macro that we are going to provide to you as part of the data fields, data files that you're going to be getting. And so with that said, we'll continue with the next section. Again, if you have any questions, just post them and we'll answer them as they come in. Auditing Excel spreadsheets is something that I have been doing for many years, but many companies do not, and it is kind of interesting to see what you notice and how does this relate to macros. But what we're going to be doing is I will be giving away a sample spreadsheet or macro-enabled spreadsheet that you can utilize to risk rank all of your spreadsheets, and it's a very neat tool developed by MrExcel himself, and something that I find is a very useful product in getting a good sense of your risk. And when you take a look at companies, a lot of people would say if they turned off their ERP system, they could survive. They would kind of get by. I don't know how true that is today, but I'll just say that word. But imagine if you turned off Excel spreadsheets for everybody, the company would crumble. And it really is because companies have become so dependent on the free ability that Excel provides you in building a little application, be it a macro like we're doing here, or just be it a spreadsheet that follows many different business rules. So when you look at spreadsheets, there are errors that come up. Here are some of the error patterns. It could be missing business rules itself. So you had a business process, you thought one thing, and something else happened in the actual business process and therefore the spreadsheet. You may not update estimates in the spreadsheet. There could be incomplete data in the spreadsheet or possibly a wrong sign where the sign in the data should have been a positive. You put a negative, or you put a negative, you forget to put the negative in there. That happens a lot. There could be rounding errors, incorrect formulas, maybe even a range where you thought there was a range of data you were setting up, and then that range really should have been set up for a much wider range of data. It could even be an incorrect cell reference where you thought you were selecting cell B1, and in essence you did select B1, but B1 was blank and it should have had information in it. So a website that is out there and focused on this topic is usebrig.org. And USPRIG is the European Spreadsheet Risk Interest Group. And if you take a look here, let me just drag this over. Great website. I wanted to show you, there are, I guess if you are in the UK, in 2012 here, there is an event happening on July 5th and 6th where professors and directors and managers from all around come and talk about utilizing spreadsheet, but also the risks around spreadsheets. So, again, the About Us is here. There are various other research, best practice. I kind of like the horror stories because these are really useful. where you get all of these different news stories. You can click on the source. Here's one from 2012. I just saw this one. They had to reiterate its 2011 financial forecast after releasing confidential company information to analysts, and et cetera, et cetera. And they inadvertently embedded it in a spreadsheet template, and there it went. So there's lots of other, here are, again, January 4th, 2012. It kind of, the list is endless, and as you scroll down all these errors, if you ever want to scare your accounting department, you just have them take a look at this website, and they'll see all the things that are wrong. But this is a really useful thing to take a look at someday and learn from, because there is quite a bit there, and look at this, there are even training videos that they have. So this is really a great website, and if you ever want to learn anything about, I guess, the spreadsheet risk, definitely take a look at that. So, okay, with that said, we'll move on to what we're going to be talking about. Now, what I was going to talk about, and actually let me just kind of head back here to where I was in this particular item here. Basically, Active Data, or Information Active, is a product out there, and Active Data is one of their product lines. Active Data for Excel is something that we're going to utilize first, and then we're going to utilize a macro-enabled worksheet on top of Active Data. And, you know, let me just, you can get there by informationactive.com, and we'll just open up Excel here. So Active Data kind of fits within your toolbar. And you can see here when you download it, you can get a 30-day download for free. So if you want to test it out and do all the things that we're talking about here, even before buying the product, that is fine. It's a trial, and you're welcome to do that. And again, what's also nice is all of the macros that we talked about in building macros, you can also macro into Active Data. I mean, you have to be a little careful of how you're setting up your data and what you're looking for and all that stuff. But, you know, if you're doing things over and over again, like a duplicates test or a Benford law test or whatever, you can macro a lot of that as well. So the one thing that we're going to talk about is automating the risk analysis of your spreadsheet. So step one of that process is to actually index all of your sheets. And actually, we're going to index workbooks instead of sheets here. We're going to index books or workbooks. And I'm not going to click this button because it can take some time. But what you can do is actually, you know, browse and say, okay, I would like to go after my entire C drive, and I would look at every spreadsheet associated with that particular C drive. And you could do this on your network, your computer network. You could do this for just maybe some spreadsheets that you received and you put into a folder called Audit Net November 16th. And, you know, that's usually what I would do. I would collect a bunch of spreadsheets from a department, put them into this folder, and then run this indexing worksheets, and just click the Finish button. When you do that, and bear with me one second here, we're just going to open up, I'm going to open up a past index that I created. I actually talked to the developer about this when we developed this initially, and I did run this before. You can kind of see what we got here result-wise. And what we have is a indexing of your hard drive, and it actually gives you lots of stats, and it actually even goes into every sheet within the workbook. So if I had a workbook here, let me just get a payable sample pivot workbook. There are multiple sheets within that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and each one of them is a sheet or a chart, and it kind of logs all of this in. So it's a great way just to get a population summary of what you are looking at. Well, in addition to that, what it does is it also provides you an indexing of all of your information. So let's take a look at what we have here. And this is where I kind of helped out, because what I wanted to do is identify some of the areas that you might consider to be risky. So let me just kind of open this up just a little bit so you can see it by double-clicking on the row, the column there. It tells you the number of rows, the number of columns that have data, the number of cells that have data, the number of blank cells within that set of cells, the number of hidden worksheets or cells in this case, and the number of used cells, the number of named ranges, and there's at least one in there at least, the number of links, and I believe that is external links to other spreadsheets. We didn't have any. Number of formulas, the number of errors in formulas if you had any, the number of if statements, because I find an if statement function can be a little bit odd or something that might be risky. A nested if statement. Now this is one where we have, and nested if statement is even more risky, so it's an if this and that and that kind of thing. Now the sum plus and the end sum minus, I like these because what they do is they actually identify areas where you have a sum, but then you're adding something to it. You have a plus symbol, so you have like equal sum, A1 to A50, and then you have a plus something else or a minus something else. And that is always a little risky because you're wondering, are people plugging data to make it work, or why not just sum up the column and that's it? So we just kind of highlighted a bunch of different attributes or variables that you might want to risk rank your spreadsheet on. And I like active data, and the reason I suggested it is that it provides a really nice population summary, something I've never seen before in any other schedule. Don't know how to make the macro to do this one, so I'm not even going to try it and tell you, you may want to just try this add-in, especially given it's free for the 30 days. And once I have this opened up, what I can now do is open up a risk ranking spreadsheet, and it's a macro-enabled spreadsheet that we can utilize. Now, before we jump into the actual indexing and work, I wanted to show you the weighting factors slide so you have an idea of what they actually are, and you can refer back to this as needed. And again, this was my quick rambling of all of those risk factors written out for you here. And the process we're going to follow, we've kind of done steps 1 and 2. We've moved all files to a folder. We've run active data index workbooks. And now we're going to do the final steps here. But we're going to use this Excel-enabled worksheet or macro-enabled worksheet. And all we have to do is copy and paste the information from the index workbooks into the Excel riskrank.xls workbook. And we're going to run the macro, calculate weighted score macro, and again, the Alt F8 is actually the quick way of doing it, but calculate weighted score by selecting macro and selecting it. And what it's going to do is it's actually going to risk rank all of the spreadsheets based on a weighting sheet that we created. And as you'll see in a second here, it's something that is a bit beyond the scope of discussion today, but something that I hope you find useful. And I wanted to show you, a more advanced macro set so we can all dream to make something like this one day. So what we're going to do is open up the Excel risk rank spreadsheet that will be provided to you. And here's a key point. Again, I had my options set in the Trust Center to be disabled but notify. So I can click options and I can say enable the content. And again, those step process we had was right here. But what I'll do is I'll just go to my index, and what I can now do is go over to my other Excel spreadsheet, which is the active data index that we had set up. And I can copy by just highlighting, by selecting that cell right there, and right-clicking and saying copy, and going down and going over to my Excel risk rank. I can actually go over to the cell A and do a right-click and paste. And what that'll do is provide all of this information into this schedule right here. Again, I can go and select the macro here by going Developers, Macro, Calculate Weighted Scores, hit the Run button. Now, what that did was, and before I look up top here, I'm just going to go over to my weighting sheet. What I can do, again, this is, we'll do an equal sum here just to show you. This will add up to 100 points. Now, what you can do is you can change this to whatever you'd like. If you think errors in formulas should be 35%, and let's say that the number of columns is 0%, we're still kind of keeping that 100% there. And what we'll then do is go over to the weighted item here. So now that it's weighted, what it's doing, I actually like to take this schedule and just kind of drag that bar over so I know what that is. And I can then go over to the far right. I don't really care about all this stuff happening in between. What it's doing is every time there's an item showing up like NSUM plus, it is taking for all of the spreadsheets, So if again, we have 7 of them, it's then saying let's take the number of points, weight it, and weight it based on the sum of the number of items. So it's like 1/7 and multiplied by the score that we had and put that in there. And and again, it's setting up a weighted score across all of your spreadsheets. So I go all the way over to the right here, and I go to this column called weighted scores total. And you can do a few things. I mean, if you'd like to copy this to a new schedule, you can. A lot of times, again, I just like to kind of drag this down as well so I can see it. And I like to just scroll down and take a look and say, that one looks a bit risky. Let me highlight that guy. Let me go up. That one looks a little bit risky as well, and that one looks a little bit risky as well. But again, just showing you the complexity here of this macro, and that it's not only taking the weightings that you've set, taking this index, but then calculating a weighted average for each column and risk scoring in totality over to the way right here, if I can get there, all of your spreadsheets. So you can actually get a risk score for every spreadsheet that you can then just very quickly take a look at and say, these are the 3 or 4 spreadsheets that I really should be looking at because they just look really weird. And not only is it the spreadsheet itself, but as I go over to the left here, it's the actual sheet within that spreadsheet. So it's the payable sample data within the payable sample pivot. That particular sheet is the one item that I should be looking at, and because it has one of the higher scores out of all of the data. So again, wanted to show you this. It's a little bit of a segue from macros, but at the same time, it's showing you a very advanced macro for your use, and hopefully you'll find that useful. Okay, so we've launched the final polling question of the day, and before we kind of wrap things up here, just wanted to get this one out here. And what is the website that's devoted to errors in spreadsheets? And is it usprig.org, richlanza.com, excelerrors.com, or errorsinexcel.com? And most of you have voted, but I'll just keep that open for a little bit longer before going any further. And again, just checking the questions. Feel free to ask as we're towards the end of our session today. Happy to answer anything that comes through that you have. Okay, I think everyone, we'll just give it another 10 or 20 seconds here if you can vote. Almost everybody's got it right. Thank you. And I will close that and share that poll. And as you'll see here, yes, usprig.org. It's been out there for quite some time, and a great website. It's gotten better in the way they show things, and I'm kind of curious to check out their video training, so I'm going to check that out later today myself, and the others were made up. And I actually even checked that they don't exist, so Usprig will be what you'd find. And I think if you type errors in Excel, you'll end up at Usprig pretty quickly. And it's really great if you're trying to sell the concept of doing Excel spreadsheet auditing. This is just one great way to do that. So, okay, with that said, let me hide the poll and get back to sharing our screen here. We're kind of at the end of the session, and did want to say if you have any questions, feel free to post them through. I can read them out and also answer them online. Just let me know. And as that's happening here, I'll move on here. I did want to note we have kind of an audit software.net, AuditNet webinar, item. It's kind of our own little discount program here that we're providing through Active Data. You can go to that link and get the 25% off price. It's really a great product for the money, so definitely something to check out. And that was part of that last section that we talked about. And auditsoftwarevideos.com, where all of these videos will be posted. Everything you've learned today will be posted out there. And it is something that you may want to take a look at. What I like about it is, granted, Jim and I are the developers of this, and What is great, though, is that you can repeat the instruction over and over again, and is something that might be useful. Jim, I didn't know if you had any thoughts here as well on this this website.
Yeah, I think that people are, starting to get acclimated to this method of learning, and obviously the whole concept that we're promoting of training without travel has really caught on, and I think that these videos just reinforce that, because you can go back and you can pick out the vignettes, the segments that you're currently dealing with, and then go ahead and review them, and we view it as sort of just-in-time training, which is something that Rich and I both really encourage. And I think today's webinar was fantastic, and I can't wait to launch Excel and try out some of the techniques for creating macros. I've always been sort of afraid to do that, but seeing the presentation from today, I got some renewed confidence. So.
Yeah, and what I find, again, especially with macros, they are a much harder topic, but something that you almost want to watch it a couple of times before you try it. And even some of the things I was learning from Tracy, I myself in today's session, I was almost afraid to do myself until, watching some of the things that she had a couple of times. So again, I look forward to your thoughts there as well. I guess, Jim, I didn't know if you wanted to speak to this as well.
Yeah, we are still conducting the survey. We have the survey on the audit use of technology, or the technology used by auditors, and we've gotten a great response to this. We've gotten over 700 auditors that have responded to this survey, and the preliminary results are quite eye-opening in terms of how far we still have to go with the use of technology. And of course, what we found from the survey is that most auditors are still using it on an ad hoc basis, and it seems like Excel is the go-to tool for most auditors, even those that have more advanced software installed. They're still coming back to Excel, and so today's webinar on using Excel and developing macros for routine audit tasks is just right in line with the bulk of the audit community.
Yeah, sounds great. And let me just this is our contact info, and especially for Tracy's contact info. If you have any questions along the lines of the macros, I can happily answer them. But Tracy also is an excellent resource and somebody that you should definitely take a look at as well. So I wanted to provide her info. But again, we really thank you for coming out today and taking a look at everything we have here. And I didn't know if you had any final thoughts here, Jim, but yeah, I think it went well.
Yeah, I do have some closing thoughts, but before that, I don't know if you wanted to mention, Rich, about the special that we're running right now with the audit software videos for the remainder of the year, June through December.
Yeah, I mean, if you just go out to auditnet.org, bear with me, I don't want to mess up too much here on my website here, bear with me. Just right on the home page, we have like a 2-minute video that does explain audit software videos, and a little bit below that you can get your training without travel, ACL software, or the Excel version. And we have a lot of rebates that we're giving back here. So again, there is a price of say $449 for the ACL training, or $799 for everything. And we also have an Excel option, so it's just the Excel type option for $449. But we give you a lot back here, so that in essence, it kind of costs you, after all these rebates, about $50 or $150. Again, you are paying the $799 or $449. I want to be clear, but we are giving a lot of free books and other types of access to it. So you end up getting like 18-month access to everything, which is just fantastic. Is a great way to manage things. So hopefully, yeah, feel free to take a look at that. And if you have any questions about anything here, feel free to give me a call or email me, and we'd be happy to help you on that as well.
Excellent. Very good, Rich. Well, I just wanted to thank Rich and for putting this together, as well as those who participated in the webinar. We're glad that you could join us and hope the session provided you with value-added, useful information. You will be receiving an evaluation form after the conclusion of the session. Please take a few minutes to complete it when it arrives, as it will help us improve our webinars. And again, we do have more webinars focused on ACL structured learning, as well as Excel and other software for auditors. So you can visit the AuditNet site, or you can visit auditsoftwarevideos.com, and you should be able to find links to the information. We have events scheduled for June, along with the special offers that Rich has covered here. So again, please know that we're available for additional support after the webinar. Feel free to contact us by phone or email if we can be of any additional assistance. And I'd like to thank everybody, and please enjoy the rest of your day.